The first crack was small, a missed call at midnight, a text that didn't quite make sense, a sudden flush on Emma's face when Michael asked where she had been. But small cracks, left untended, spiderwebbed until the whole damn thing split. Wide open. The suburban silence of Willow Creek Lane, normally filled with the dull hum of lawnmowers and idle chatter, seemed deafening as Michael sat parked in his car, hands clenched on the steering wheel. He stared at the illuminated screen of his phone, Emma's message still glowing. Stuck late at work. Don't wait up. Only he knew better. He had known for weeks, he just hadn't wanted to see it. Michael pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, breathing deep. His mind reeled. The late nights, the secretive smiles, the scent of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to Emma's scarf once, brushed off as a client, must have been in the elevator. Lies stacked upon lies. When he finally stepped into their home, the place they had bought together 7 years ago, it smelled like lavender candles and betrayal. Emma sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, a glass of wine half-finished by her. Sister, she looked up and smiled, strained, guilty. "Hey, you're home early." "Yeah," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Early night at the firm." An awkward silence spread between them, sticky and suffocating. He wanted to shout, to accuse, but instead he leaned against the door frame, feeling the weight of their history, like a chain around his throat. Chapter 2. The Secret. The investigation began quietly, almost unintentionally. Michael didn't hire a private investigator right away. First, it was just checking her phone when she left it unattended, looking through emails, glancing at her calendar appointments with too many dinners with clients that never ended with receipts or thank yous. Then one evening, it spiraled. He followed her, Emma, vibrant and intelligent Emma, who had once stood by him through law school and whispered dreams about growing old together, met someone else at a boutique hotel downtown. Michael parked 2 blocks away and watched through a trembling zoom lens, her embrace with a man he didn't recognize. A kiss, quick, hungry, familiar. It felt like someone had plunged a hand into his chest and squeezed. The man was sleek, confident. Younger. A marketing executive from her firm, Michael would later find out, Ryan Maxwell. Divorced, no kids. And Emma, his Emma, leaned into him like she'd been waiting for him her whole life. Michael drove home blind with rage. In his mind, scenarios unfolded. Confrontation, divorce, destruction. But another part of him, the quieter, more dangerous part, began to whisper alternatives. Chapter 3. The Fallout. When he finally confronted her, it wasn't with shouting. It was with cold precision. "I know about Ryan," Michael said as he placed her phone on the kitchen table, open to a string of texts no married woman should be sending. Emma's face went slack, then crumbled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears immediately welling. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Michael barked a bitter laugh. "You fucked him, Emma. That's pretty simple." Her shoulders shook. She tried to explain how lonely she had been, how distant Michael had become after his father's death, how she had felt invisible. But the words tasted like ashes to Michael. He had been grieving, working, trying to survive. Hadn't she been supposed to understand? In the days that followed, the house became a war zone. Half-whispered arguments behind closed doors, icy silences, at breakfast. Minor characters in their lives, neighbors, friends, even Emma's younger sister, Lily, began to notice the tension. Lily cornered Michael one evening while Emma was at a supposed work event. "She's spiraling." "You know," Lily said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Ryan, he's not what she thinks. He's been screwing half the women in her office. Emma's just lost." Michael stared at her, a coil of dark satisfaction tightening in his gut. Maybe this would all implode without him lifting a finger. Maybe he didn't have to dirty his hands at all. Chapter 4. Moral Crossroads weeks passed. Michael filed for separation quietly, not serving the papers yet. Part of him wanted her to come crawling, to beg. Another part, meaner, colder, wanted to see her suffer first. Meanwhile, Emma seemed caught between guilt and defiance. Some nights she came home late, reeking of alcohol. Other nights she sat on the back porch, chain-smoking and staring into the dark. The lack of communication became its own prison. Every conversation twisted into accusations, evasions, or bitter, tired apologies. One evening, after a rare and disastrous attempt at counseling, Emma blurted, "I never stopped loving you, Mike. I just stopped feeling like you loved me." He didn't know what to say. He wanted to believe she meant it. He wanted to believe they could claw their way back. But part of him whispered that forgiveness would make him a fool. That night, he drove past Ryan Maxwell's downtown condo, knowing Emma was inside. He sat across the street in the dark, gripping a tire iron he found in the trunk. He never used it. Instead, he drove home and tore up the separation papers in a rage he couldn't even name. Chapter 5. The Choice-In. The final confrontation. Days later, Emma confessed the full truth. Ryan had dumped her. Had been sleeping with his ex-wife all along. Emma was wrecked, hollowed out by the realization. "I was stupid," she said, voice raw. "I threw away everything real for something that never even existed." Michael listened, heart pounding. He could see the regret in her eyes, the raw honesty. But the trust between them was shattered glass, jagged, irreparable. Still, he saw the woman he once loved in her wreckage, and he saw himself, bitter, isolated, not blameless in the slow disintegration of their marriage. In the end, he didn't give her an answer, not that night. He packed a small bag, kissed her forehead gently, and said, "I need time." As he drove away from Willow Creek Lane under a bruised purple sky, Michael realized the future was a murky road. Maybe they would find their way back, to each other. Maybe they would remain strangers with shared memories. Or maybe, like broken porcelain, some things just stayed shattered. The story didn't end neatly. It never really does. Michael rented a small, furnished apartment across town, a sterile space smelling faintly of bleach and forgotten dreams. He told no one where he went. He let calls go unanswered, emails pile up. Even Emma's messages, desperate and clumsy. "At first, please call me. I need to explain. I miss you," were left unopened. He needed distance, but distance didn't silence the memories. Late at night, he would wake from dreams where he found her again, smiling the way she used to, only to see her dissolve into Ryan's arms. The betrayal wasn't just about the sex. It was about all. The nights he had been hurting, grieving alone, and she had been somewhere else, choosing someone else. And yet, he missed her. The way her hand used to rest lightly on his thigh when they drove somewhere. The way she laughed when she watched bad horror movies. How she used to absent-mindedly braid her hair while reading. Ghosts of their life hovered around him, whispering, what could have been. Chapter 7. The investigation one evening, a knock at his door startled him. It was Lily, Emma's sister. She wore jeans and a threadbare hoodie, looking more like a runaway than the vibrant young woman he remembered. Without waiting for an invitation, she barged inside, pacing like a caged animal. "I need to show you something," she said grimly. Michael hesitated. Part of him wanted to slam the door shut, cut ties with anything connected to Emma. But curiosity, or something darker, kept him rooted. Lily pulled out a flash drive. "Ryan wasn't just cheating on Emma," she said, voice low. He's been running scams through the company, money laundering. Emma's name is all over the paperwork. He set her up. She's facing an internal investigation. Michael blinked, cold dread pooling in his stomach. She could go to jail? He asked numbly. Lily nodded. Unless someone helps her prove she was manipulated. The words hung between them like poison. Michael hated her for what she had done, but he also knew Emma, knew she wasn't a criminal, knew that she, like him, had made desperate, stupid mistakes when she was lost. Helping her would cost him everything. His pride, his rage, maybe even the clean exit he thought he wanted. Walking away would be easy, but Michael was tired of easy betrayals. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The confrontation with Ryan wasn't cinematic. No punches thrown. No screaming match. Instead, Michael met him in a bland coffee shop downtown, sliding into the booth across from him like two mobsters negotiating a truce. Ryan smirked. Didn't expect you to come crawling on her behalf. Michael smiled coldly. No crawling. Just letting you know. If Emma goes down for your scam, I'm coming for you. Legally, financially, personally. I'll make sure you can't work a marketing gig for a lemonade stand when I'm done. Ryan's cocky veneer flickered. For the first time, Michael saw the cracks. He left the meeting with a quiet satisfaction. He hadn't felt in months. Not revenge, justice, small difference. But it mattered. Chapter 9. The letter weeks later, after internal investigations cleared Emma's name, and Ryan was quietly fired, and under IRS scrutiny thanks to an anonymous. Depastekel received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Mike. There aren't words for how sorry I am, not just for Ryan, for giving up on us when things got hard. I forgot what we promised each other, to choose each other, even when it wasn't easy. I understand if you can't forgive me. I will always love you, whether we find our way back or not. Emma. Michael sat for a long time with the letter resting in his lap. Forgiveness wasn't a straight road, neither was love. Maybe they would meet again someday, two different people shaped by the wreckage. Maybe not, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel trapped by the past. He folded the letter carefully, tucked it into a drawer, and went outside, breathing in the cold, sharp air of an uncertain new beginning. Final lines. Michael looked up at the night sky. Broken things could sometimes be mended, but sometimes you simply learn to live with the cracks, and that was enough. Michael returned to work, but it wasn't the same. Colleagues still gave him looks, sympathy mingled with curiosity, the kind reserved for someone who had survived a very public kind of humiliation. He found solace in small, ordinary things. A new coffee place on the corner, evening walks through the park, repairing the battered guitar he hadn't touched in years. One rainy Saturday, he bumped into Anna, a mutual friend he hadn't seen since the collapse. They made small talk, weather, traffic, work, until Anna hesitated, then blurted out, "She's different now, you know. Emma. Quieter. Like someone emptied out all the light and she's trying to find it again." Michael didn't know what to say to that. He didn't owe Emma anything. And yet, guilt prickled under his skin. He hated the part of himself that still cared. Later that night, he pulled out the letter again, read it in the dim glow of his bedside lamp. He thought about forgiveness, not as an absolution of her choices, but as a way to release himself from the heavy, exhausting anger that clung to him. But was it truly forgiveness if he could never forget? Chapter 11. A quiet crossing. 3 months later, a charity event for the hospital they had once volunteered at drew them both like moths to a painful flame. Michael saw her before she saw him. Emma stood by the far wall, hair pulled into a messy knot, wearing a navy dress that looked slightly too big on her now slighter frame. She looked raw, exposed, but alive in a way he hadn't expected. Their eyes met across the room. Everything, the love, the betrayal, the loss, passed silently between them. After a long moment, she offered a tentative nod, a half-smile that was more apology than greeting. Michael nodded back, polite, distant, aching. Neither crossed the room. Some wounds were too fresh, some bridges too scorched. Maybe in another life, another time. Tonight, silence would have to be enough. Chapter 12. The Open Road Driving Home. Afterward, Michael realized something. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't love her the way he used to either. What they had was real once. What they lost was real, too. And now, he had his own life to rebuild. Not a return to the man he was, but the slow, painful forging of someone new. Someone who could see the world with clear eyes, not through the blinding haze of need or nostalgia. At a red light, he closed his eyes briefly and whispered, not to Emma, not to anyone, but to the broken boy inside him, "You survived." When the light turned green, he drove on without looking back. Final note. Emma and Michael remained distant echoes in each other's lives. Never quite strangers, never quite friends. The thread between them, frayed and worn, stretched silently, across time. Whether they would ever meet again with open hearts, no one could say. But in the quiet spaces of their separate lives, both carried the memory of what had been beautiful once, and the lessons of how even the purest love can falter when trust is broken. And sometimes heartbreak was not the end of the story, just the beginning of another. This will lean into a bittersweet, emotionally charged vibe, full of unspoken feelings, closure, and the idea that some things can't be rebuilt, but can still be honored. Final chapter. Years later. The bookstore was tucked between a boarded-up cafe and a hardware shop that smelled of oil and rain. Michael ducked inside on a whim, drawn by the sudden downpour hammering the sidewalk. The place smelled like paper and dust, old wood floors creaking under every step. He was leafing through a travel memoir when he heard it, a soft, familiar voice. Laughing, warm, unguarded. He turned before he could think better of it. And there she was. Emma. Her hair was shorter now, shot through with threads of silver. She wore jeans and a worn leather jacket, holding a little boy by the hand. Her son, perhaps 6 or 7, with her wide green eyes and a mischievous grin. She looked happy. Not in the dazzling way she once had, but in a quieter, steadier way, like someone who had weathered a brutal storm and found a kind of peace. Their eyes met. For a second, the world held its breath. Michael smiled first this time, small, genuine, without bitterness. Emma's face softened. She whispered something to the boy, who scampered off toward the children's section. Tentatively, she crossed the aisle toward him. "Hey," she said, voice barely above the hush of the rain outside. "Hey," he echoed. They stood there, awkward at first. Two ghosts meeting in the ruins of an old life. "How have you been?" she asked finally, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous tick he remembered. "Good," he said. And it was true. Not perfect, but good in the way that meant he had rebuilt himself, scar tissue and all. "You?" She nodded, tears shimmering but unshed. "Good too. Took a long time. But I got there." Michael glanced toward the boy, now laughing as he tried to stack books taller than himself. "He's beautiful," Michael said softly. Emma's smile was radiant, a mix of pride and sadness. "His name's Jonah." A pause. Longer this time. "I'm glad you're okay, Emma," Michael said, and meant it. She blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. "I think about us sometimes," she admitted. "Not with regret exactly. More like gratitude. We weren't meant to last, but we mattered. You mattered. Michael felt the sting of tears and breathed through it. You mattered too, he said quietly. No accusations, no demands, just truth. A life once shared, now sealed behind them like an old, weathered door. Emma reached out, hesitated, then lightly touched his hand. Just a brush, fleeting but electric. Be happy, Mike, she whispered. You too, he said. And then she was gone, her laughter and the boys fading into the rainy afternoon. Michael stood there a while longer, the old ache stirring in his chest. But this time, it wasn't sharp. It was tender. It was real. He left the bookstore without buying anything, stepping into the rain without an umbrella, letting it soak him clean. Life went on. Not perfect, not untouched, but still, beautifully, stubbornly forward. Last line, some loves end. Some scars remain. But some hearts, against all odds, find a way to heal. Michael found himself moving, almost without thinking, following Emma's path out of the bookstore. She was standing under the awning, wrestling with a broken umbrella, her son already splashing in a puddle nearby. She noticed him and gave a sheepish laugh. This thing's useless. Michael smiled and held out his hand toward the small cafe next door. Come on, let me buy you a coffee, for old time's sake. For a heartbeat, he thought she might say no. But then she nodded, and they shepherded Jonah inside, dripping and laughing and suddenly feeling absurdly young and ancient at the same time. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and espresso. They found a quiet corner. Jonah sat with a tablet, absorbed in a game, leaving them wrapped in a fragile, stolen moment. For a long while, they just sipped their drinks in silence. Finally, Emma spoke, voice low. I'm sorry I never said it properly. You did, Michael said gently. You just didn't have the words back then. I didn't either. She studied him, as if memorizing his face anew. You deserved better. So did you, he said. We just broke somewhere along the way. Emma wiped at her, eyes embarrassed. I used to think love was enough to fix everything. But sometimes it's the thing that breaks you the hardest. Michael nodded, staring out at the rain beating against the window. I don't hate you, he said at last. I did, for a long time. But now, I just hope you have good days, that you're loved the way you needed to be. Tears slipped down her cheeks and she let them. No dramatic apologies, no begging for forgiveness, just the raw, messy truth of it all. Jonah looked up from his tablet, concerned. Mama? Emma quickly wiped her face and smiled. I'm okay, sweetheart. Michael stood, tossing a few bills on the table. It was good to see ya, he said, meaning every word, even the ones he couldn't say out loud. You too, she whispered. They didn't hug. They didn't promise to stay in touch. They simply smiled, two people who had once shattered each other, and then turned toward their separate lives, forever changed but still standing. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist, the sky cracking open, with the faintest hint of gold. Maybe, Michael thought as he walked away, some stories didn't end with reunions or revenge. Maybe some stories just ended with acceptance. And maybe sometimes that was enough. Final lines. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. Some memories fade unevenly, but even broken hearts can beat stronger, wiser, braver in the end. It had been a Saturday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that felt stitched together by sunlight and laughter. Michael and Emma sprawled on a battered picnic blanket in the park, half a bottle of cheap red wine between them, a scrappy, little rescue dog they had impulsively adopted tumbling in circles nearby. Emma wore a yellow sundress, the fabric rippling in the breeze. Michael couldn't stop looking at her, at the way she threw her head back when she laughed, careless and free. They had no money, no plan beyond what was in front of them. The sun, the wine, each other. "Tell me a secret," Emma said, grinning. Her cheeks flushed pink. Michael pretended to think hard, tapping his chin. "I sometimes wish I had met you earlier, when I still thought I had all the time in the world." Emma's smile faltered. Not sadness exactly, but something deeper, more tender. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to," she said, threading her fingers through his. "And I found you." They lay there for a while, the world shrinking to a handful of moments, the dog's clumsy leaps, the hum of bees in the grass, the warmth of her skin against his. Michael thought about telling her then, how he couldn't imagine a future without her, how he would have given up anything just to keep this feeling. But the words stuck in his throat. Some truths, he knew even then, were too big to say out loud without breaking something. Instead, he squeezed her hand and kissed her hair, and promised himself that he would always, always protect what they had. He didn't know yet how promises could fail even with the best intentions, how love could curdle under the slow, grinding weight of disappointment and distance. But that day, it was enough. She was enough. They were enough. For a while, memory dissolves. The narrative shifts back to present-day Michael walking away from the bookstore, rain-washed and solemn. The memory clings to him, bittersweet and fragile, a reminder of who they had once been before mistakes and betrayal and regret built a chasm between them. He smiled through the ache, letting the memory go like a paper boat into the stream of his life. Some things you don't heal from, he thought. Some things you just learn to live around. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Closing line. Love didn't always survive, but the memory of it, sometimes that was the purest thing left. 6 months later, Michael stood in line at a corner bakery, tapping his wallet absently against his leg. The rain had given way to a crisp autumn, the air sharp with the smell of fallen leaves, and something new he couldn't quite name. The line moved, and he found himself standing behind a woman with a laugh that struck him like a memory, warm, unguarded, real. She glanced back at him, catching him off guard. Her smile was nothing like Emma's. It wasn't a replacement or a ghost. It was simply hers. Open, a little hesitant, human. For a split second, Michael's chest tightened with the old fear of trusting, of hoping, of losing. But he breathed through it. Maybe some scars weren't meant to fade. Maybe they were meant to remind you how much you could survive. The woman ordered a coffee and a blueberry scone. She lingered by the counter, fumbling with her phone. Michael took a chance. "You have good taste," he said, nodding toward the scone. She laughed, not the polished, brittle laugh of someone pretending, but something easy. "Old habit," she said. "Blueberry mornings. It's a superstition at this point." Michael smiled, feeling something quiet shift inside him. Not a grand epiphany, not a sweep of dramatic music, just a slow, tentative warmth. The beginning of something, not a replacement for what was lost, but something else entirely. Maybe love didn't heal everything. Maybe it never would. But maybe, just maybe, it could still be worth the risk. Final line. Some endings aren't endings at all. Some are just the start of a new, braver story. The air in the house felt too thin. Every breath Michael took felt like he was pulling in more space than he could handle, each exhale sharp and uneven. He hadn't slept. Not really. How could he? His mind kept replaying the texts, the calls, the time spent in places he had never known about, with people he had never met. He had read the messages on Emma's phone in a daze, as if they belonged to someone else's life, not the woman he had spent the last 8 years with. "How could you do this?" he whispered to the empty room. his voice hoarse. The question wasn't directed at Emma. She was upstairs, tucked away in their bedroom, probably pretending like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. No. It was a question he couldn't answer, a question he asked of himself. He ran his fingers through his hair, his mind spiraling into anger. He wanted to scream, to lash out at her, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain coursing through him. But all that energy fizzled out. The anger felt small, and the pain felt enormous. He couldn't understand how everything they had built together had fallen apart so silently, so slowly, like the tide pulling the sand from beneath his feet. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. He wasn't sure. Time had stopped being a measurement and had become an endless, unbearable stretch. And then, as if pulled by some force beyond his control, he found himself standing in the doorway of their bedroom, watching Emma curled in the covers, her back to him. The moonlight slanted through the window, casting faint silver highlights in her hair. She looked peaceful, at ease. He hated that about her, that peace, that ability to sleep while he lay awake, his thoughts frayed at the edges. He swallowed hard and closed the door behind him quietly, as if the sound might wake her up, as if that would make a difference. "Emma," he said, his voice catching in his throat. She stirred but didn't turn around. A slight shift of her shoulders. The flicker of something, but it could have been sleep, could have been guilt, could have been nothing. "Michael?" Her voice was soft, tentative. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Some admission, an apology, a confession. But what could she possibly say? What could she say that would take this feeling, this weight of everything lost, off his chest? The silence hung between them, thick and suffocating. "I found the messages," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words felt jagged as they left his mouth. Emma froze. For the first time, she turned slowly, her gaze meeting his. There was a flicker of fear in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with something else, something guarded. I can't explain." He shook his head. He didn't want an explanation. He didn't want anything from her, but there she was, still in the bed they had once shared, with everything else between them in ruins. "Explain?" he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping him. "What could you possibly explain, Emma? How you built a life with someone else while I was right here? While I trusted you, loved you." Her face crumpled, the tears finally coming, though they seemed distant, almost resigned. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you, Michael. You have to believe that." Believe her? How could he? How could he after everything that had already happened? "You didn't want to hurt me," he echoed, his chest tightening, his hands trembling at his sides. "But you did. You did, Emma. You hurt me every day you kept this from me, every day you looked at me and smiled and pretended like nothing was wrong." Emma looked away, as if the weight of his words had pushed her too far. She wiped her eyes quickly, but the damage was done. Michael could see it now, the cracks in her, the self-preservation that had led her to make decisions without considering the full destruction they would cause. He wasn't angry anymore. No, he was too tired to be angry. He just felt empty. I thought we could fix it," she whispered, her voice so fragile, like she wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. "I wanted us to be okay, Michael. But somewhere along the way I lost myself. I don't even know how it happened." Michael's heart twisted. He didn't know how it had happened either. One moment they were planning their future, laughing together in the kitchen like they always did. The next, she was hiding secrets behind her closed doors, and he was standing here, a stranger to the woman he thought he knew. He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. He wanted to leave. He wanted to run. But there was nowhere to go. Everything was here. The home they had built, the memories they shared, all of it shattered in an instant. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said, barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can even look at you the same way again." "I know." Her voice was small, broken. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I never did." A quiet silence settled between them, thick with everything left unsaid. Michael stood there, his back to her, the weight of her betrayal still suffocating him. He didn't know where they would go from here, or even if they could go anywhere at all. But he knew one thing for certain. Everything had changed. And now, he had to figure out how to survive it. Emma sat in the darkness, her hands clenched in her lap, her gaze fixed on the faint moonlight creeping through the window. She had hoped, prayed even, that somehow they could avoid this. That somehow Michael would never find out, or that if he did, maybe it wouldn't hurt this much. But now, sitting in the cold silence of their bedroom, the truth was undeniable. The one thing she had been desperately trying to avoid was staring her in the face, and it was tearing her apart. She had been prepared for his anger. She had been prepared for the accusations, the hurt, even the quiet devastation she had seen in his eyes. But she hadn't been ready for how it felt to be caught, to have the years of half-truths and evasions exposed, and to realize, in that painful moment, that she had never really been honest with herself either. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was the realization that she had lost herself somewhere along the way, that she had traded parts of her soul for something that now felt insignificant, that her choices had been selfish, not just to Michael, but to her own integrity. "I never meant for this to happen," she whispered, even though she knew the words were hollow. They had no weight, no meaning anymore. How could they? When she had already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. Her mind flickered back to the first time she met Thomas. It hadn't been planned. It never was it? The moment everything shifted in her marriage felt so insignificant at first. A work function, a shared laugh, a late night that stretched into something more than it should have been. It wasn't even the affair itself that felt like the worst betrayal. It was the way she had deceived herself into believing she could compartmentalize it, make it fit into the small cracks of her life without destroying anything important. She hadn't even realized she was lying to herself. Not at first. But that lie had grown. And when it came spilling out, it wasn't just the affair that crushed her marriage. It was the loss of the person she had once been. Before the chaos, before the lies, she had been so careful, so calculated. But now, there was no hiding it. Michael knew. He saw her. And worse, he saw the woman she had become. He saw the pieces of her that she had carefully hidden away for years. The regret cut deeper than any guilt she could name. She had wanted to tell him, wanted to make things right before it all spiraled out of control. But it had taken one mistake after another, one delay, one refusal to face the truth. And now they were here. It wasn't just the affair that had ruined them. It was the communication she had never had with Michael, the secrets they had allowed to grow like weeds in their lives. The silence that had stretched between them until it became too late to speak the things that really mattered. She let out a shaky breath. She wanted to apologize. She wanted to fix everything, even though she knew it was too late. The damage was done. She had broken him, and in doing so, she had broken herself. The problem wasn't that she hadn't loved him anymore. She had. The problem was that she had neglected the love between them, had allowed it to fade into the background as she sought out something else to fill the emptiness she hadn't even known existed. She had always been good at pretending. But now, the truth was here, and there was no pretending anymore. She pulled the covers tighter around her, feeling the coldness that had spread between them seep into her skin. She heard him pacing downstairs, restless and consumed by the same broken pieces of the past. She knew he couldn't forgive her, and perhaps he shouldn't. But she couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere deep inside, there was a way back. A way to heal, if only they both could. The house was quiet now, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the sound of his breathing. She had no answers. She had no idea how they could possibly move forward from this. But one thing was clear. They couldn't keep pretending anymore. Not with each other. Not with themselves. The weight of everything lost was too much to bear alone. She slipped out of bed and stood at the window, watching the streetlights flicker in the distance. The world felt far away, as if they were the only two people left in it. For a moment, she considered the possibility of walking out, of leaving everything behind and starting over. But something kept her rooted, something she wasn't sure she could name. Her heart ached. She hadn't expected to feel this lost, this fragmented. She had imagined herself stronger than this. But facing the reality of the damage she had caused left her feeling utterly empty. And then, without warning, a thought struck her. Not a plan, not a solution, but a gut-wrenching realization. If Michael couldn't forgive her, if he couldn't, look at her and see more than the woman who had betrayed him, then what was left for them? What was left for her? Was forgiveness even possible, or was this the end of everything they had ever shared? She closed her eyes, the weight of the question pressing on her chest, and let herself feel the grief that had been building for so long. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She didn't know what Michael would decide. But she knew that whatever path they chose, whether they stayed or parted ways, it would never be the same. And that was the true tragedy of it all. Chapter: The quiet. Before the storm, the morning sun seeped through the blinds, casting pale light across the room. Emma had spent the night tangled in thoughts too painful to name, but now the silence was different. The house felt suffocating, the stillness unbearable. It was as if the walls were closing in on her, reminding her of everything she had broken. She hadn't heard Michael leave the room. She hadn't heard him come back either. There was a hollow distance between them now, one that felt impossible to bridge. The coldness that had crept in after their confrontation seemed to have settled into every corner of their home. She rubbed her eyes, pushing back the tears that had threatened to fall throughout the night. She couldn't cry anymore. Not for herself, at least. She knew that if Michael saw her like this, fragile and broken, he would only pull further away. He deserved better than that. The soft sound of footsteps downstairs broke her from her reverie. She glanced toward the door, feeling a pang of anxiety knot in her stomach. What would they say? How would they even begin to talk about this? Was there anything left to say at all? She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. She couldn't hide forever. She couldn't keep pretending that the world hadn't shifted under their feet. Maybe it was time to face the truth, even if it tore her apart in the process. Downstairs, Michael was in the kitchen, his back to her as he stood by the counter, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. His profile was a study in exhaustion. The lines of his jaw were sharper than she remembered, his face more tired than it had ever been. She couldn't help but notice how much older he seemed, even though it had only been a few days since the storm broke. She hesitated before taking a step toward him, unsure of how to begin. The words felt too heavy, too fraught. "Michael?" Her voice was softer than she had intended, and she could hear the tremor in it. She wasn't sure if it was fear or regret or something deeper, but it caught in her throat. He didn't turn around at first. It was as if he was giving her space. Or perhaps he didn't want to look at her. She couldn't blame him. He had every right to be angry, to hate her, to never want to see her again. "Do you want some coffee?" His voice was quiet, flat. He didn't sound angry, but he didn't sound like the man she knew either. There was no warmth in his tone, no familiarity. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she had the appetite for it. She wasn't sure if she could stomach anything right now. Still, she approached the counter, standing a few feet behind him, and watched as he silently poured coffee into 2 mugs. Her gaze flickered to his hands. His fingers, once so familiar to her, now felt like those of a stranger, rigid, distant. There were so many unspoken things between them, and yet neither of them could bring themselves to say them. "Michael, she started, but he cut her off with a small shake of his head. "I don't want to talk about this right now, Emma." His voice, though calm, held an edge of something else, something she couldn't quite place. Resignation, perhaps, or weariness. Either way, she could feel the walls he had built around himself over the past 24 hours. They were thicker now. "I know," she whispered, feeling the sting of his words more than she expected. She hadn't anticipated that he might shut her out like this, but it was the only thing that made sense. Of course he couldn't talk to her. Not yet. She stepped back, moving toward the window where the light was beginning to fill the room, casting long shadows across the floor. She gazed out into the yard, trying to steady herself, trying to breathe through the ache that had settled deep inside her. The truth was, she couldn't undo what she had done. She couldn't take back the affair, the lies, or the months of quiet neglect that had slowly eroded everything they'd built. "I don't know what to say," she said, more to herself than to him. "I don't know how to fix this." Michael set his coffee mug down and slowly turned to face her. His eyes, unreadable. There was a heaviness in his gaze now, one that she had never seen before. It cut through her like a blade, sharp and unrelenting. "You can't fix this, Emma," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "Not anymore. I don't even know if I can fix it." She closed her eyes at the weight of his words, feeling like the ground was slipping from under her. She had known that things were broken, but hearing him say it so plainly, so definitively, felt like a knife to her heart. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am so sorry." But Michael didn't respond. He just stared at her, the silence stretching between them until it felt unbearable. His silence was more cutting than any accusation could ever be. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost as if he had made a decision in his mind, Michael took a slow, deliberate step toward her. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her. But the space between them felt just as charged, just as tense as it had the night before. "I don't know what comes next," he said, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. "I don't know what we're supposed to do." She nodded, her throat tight. The truth was, she didn't know either. She couldn't tell him that everything would be okay because she didn't believe it herself. She couldn't promise that they would somehow find their way back to what they had been before. All she could offer him was her regret, her apology, and the hope that somehow they could both find a way forward, even if that meant starting from nothing. "I just don't want to lose you, Michael," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "But I don't know how to make this right." Michael's eyes softened for the briefest of moments, but the distance between them remained. The walls were still up, as tall as they had been before, and though the future was uncertain, full of questions they didn't have answers for. One thing was painfully clear: whatever they decided to do from here, neither of them could undo the past. The damage had been done, and now they both had to live with it. Chapter: The Weight of Silence. The weight of silence hung heavy in the kitchen, pressing down on Emma like an invisible force. She stared at the empty coffee cup in her hands, feeling the smooth ceramic cool against her palms. Michael hadn't moved. He stood there, watching her with an unreadable expression, the air between them taut with the unsaid. She wanted to reach out to him, to somehow bridge the vast distance between their broken selves, but every step felt like a betrayal of something deeper. A part of her, the part that still loved him with an intensity that bordered on desperation, wanted to collapse into his arms and beg for forgiveness. But the other part, the part that had betrayed him, knew she didn't deserve that kind of grace. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She set the cup down with a soft clink, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "I don't want to lose you, Michael." The words slipped out again, though she hadn't meant to speak them. She had said them earlier, but somehow now they felt heavier, more fragile. A plea wrapped in a confession. Michael's eyes flickered to her face, and for a moment she saw a flash of something, anger, pain, maybe even regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by a blankness that made her stomach churn. "You didn't lose me, Emma," he said quietly, his voice thick with restraint. "You broke me, and I don't know if I can put myself back together. Again." She flinched at the harshness in his words. It was the first time he had said it so clearly. She had always known deep down that her actions had broken something in him. But hearing it out loud, seeing it in his eyes, was like a dagger to her heart. "I didn't mean to break you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was just so lost, and I didn't know how to fix it. And when I made that mistake, I thought I could undo it, but I can't. I see that now." Michael's gaze softened, just a fraction. But the distance between them remained. The room felt colder, the walls pressing in tighter. He stepped away from the counter and walked toward the door that led to the living room, not waiting for her to follow. But she did. She couldn't stay in that kitchen, feeling like she was suffocating. She followed him into the living room, where he had collapsed onto the couch the night before, staring blankly at the TV. It was the same now. He wasn't watching anything. Just staring, thinking. He rubbed his eyes as if trying to erase the weariness of the past few days, but she could see the weight of it in the way his shoulders sagged. He had carried this burden alone for so long. Now, it was hers to carry too. "Don't know what you want from me anymore, Emma," he said, his voice so low she almost missed it. "You're here, and I'm here. But what does that even mean? I can't just pretend everything's fine, and I can't forgive you the way you want me to. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Her heart pounded in her chest. He was right, of course. She couldn't expect him to forgive her in an instant, to forget the betrayal, but she was terrified of losing him, of living with the regret of what she had done without a chance to make it right. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said quietly, each word weighted with the truth she had been avoiding. "I just want to understand. I want to fix this. If I could go back, I would. But I can't. So all I have is this." She gestured between them, the space that separated them feeling like an insurmountable chasm. "What do we do now? How do we move forward?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to keep his composure. He looked at her, his eyes flickering with a conflict she couldn't name. "I don't know. I don't know if I can move forward with you. Not right now. I need time, Emma. I need space to figure out who I am without you, without this, without the person I thought you were." His words were a punch to her gut. She had always thought of herself as the person who could fix things, who could make it all right, but now it felt like every attempt to make amends only pushed him further away. "I'm sorry, Michael," she whispered again, the tears threatening to break free. "I'll give you space, whatever you need, but please, please don't shut me out completely." He stood up abruptly, running a hand over his face in frustration. "You don't get it, do you? I don't want space because I need a break from you, Emma. I need space because I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know who we are. Everything feels like a lie now." The words stung, but they were the truth. They were both lost, and neither of them knew how to find their way back. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of their breathing, the distant hum of the world moving on outside. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice quieter, more measured. "I don't know if we can come back from this. I really don't. But I'm not saying we can't try. I'm just telling you the truth, Emma. I can't promise you anything right now." Her heart clenched painfully in her chest. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the one she had feared all along. The uncertainty, the possibility of never finding a way back. It loomed over them like a dark cloud. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll wait. I'll wait however long it takes." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure she could bear the weight of waiting. She wasn't sure how long she could live in this limbo, neither here nor there, neither together nor apart. Michael turned his back on her once more, walking toward the door. "I need some time to think. I'll be out for a while." And with that, he was gone. Emma stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The house felt even emptier. Now the silence deafening. She had done this. She had created this mess, and now she had to live with the consequences. She sank onto the couch where he had been moments before, her heart breaking all over again. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Their lives had been shattered, and no amount of time or apologies could ever undo what had been done. The days passed in a blur. Emma found herself constantly checking her phone, waiting for a message from Michael, but it never came. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional text or phone call from friends or family who knew nothing of what was happening. She put on a brave face for them, but every day felt like a struggle, a battle against the suffocating weight of her own guilt, against the unknown future that loomed over her. And Michael? He had become a ghost in their shared home, a shadow that haunted every room. He came and went, never saying much, never offering any glimpse into his thoughts. It was as if he had become a version of himself she no longer recognized. Or maybe it was she who had changed. The more she tried to repair the rift between them, the more she realized how deep it ran, and the more she realized that the possibility of forgiveness was slipping further and further away.